Helen Carter's hands trembled as she held the crumpled eviction notice, the letters blurred by the tears she could no longer hold back. 3 days. That was all that remained before she and her children would be thrown out onto the street. On the thin mattress he shared with his sister, little Michael coughed, a sound that was becoming deeper and more alarming with every passing hour. The dark circles under Helen's brown eyes seemed to have deepened overnight. A button that had come loose from the boy's coat hung by a single thread, and she didn't even have any thread left to sew it back on. But Helen had no idea that this rainy Monday morning would mark the day her life and the life of a lonely man would intersect in a way that changed their destinies forever. The rain punished the dirt roads as Helen crossed the main square, carrying Michael in her arms because the boy was burning up with a fever too high to walk. Laura clung to her mother's soaked skirt, her little bare feet splashing through the mud. People looked away as they passed. Tuberculosis. The word had spread through the small town like fire in dry straw. And now Helen was a pariah, a woman marked by misfortune and contagion. The old clients who used to bring her sewing work had vanished. The church claimed their resources were exhausted. The hospital demanded an upfront payment she could never hope to gather. Helen collapsed onto a park bench, the strength finally abandoning her legs. The rain mixed with her tears, while Laura whimpered softly, shivering against her body. Michael burned with fever in her arms, every breath a painful effort that made his small chest rise and fall irregularly. She had already knocked on every door. She had begged everyone she knew. She had sold everything of value she owned. Her wedding ring, her late husband's watch, even the few yards of fabric she kept for emergencies. And now, nothing remained. Absolutely nothing. "Lord," she whispered, her voice broken by despair, "if you exist, if you can hear me, please show me a way. Not for me. I accept whatever comes. But for these innocent children, they don't deserve to pay for my sins. Please." The words came out in jagged breaths, mixed with sobs that made her entire body shake. Her hands, once so skilled with needle and thread, now trembled uselessly as she clutched her son to her chest. That was when the button finally snapped off Michael's coat, falling onto the wet ground and rolling away. Helen didn't even have the strength to go after it. The sound of heavy boots approaching barely registered in her consciousness. It was only when a shadow blocked the rain falling on them that Helen looked up. A tall man, broad-shouldered with a face marked by time and work in the sun, stood before her. He held a leather coat in his hands, extending it toward her. Helen recoiled instinctively, her wounded pride still strong enough to refuse charity from strangers. "It isn't charity, ma'am." His voice was firm, but surprisingly gentle. "It is humanity." Just then, Michael coughed, that hollow, dangerous sound that echoed from the bottom of compromised lungs. Raphael Montgomery froze. He knew that sound. Sophie, his 2-year-old daughter, had been making that exact same noise for 3 nights. It was the reason he had come into town to fetch medicine. Something inside him broke as he looked at this shattered woman, protecting her children with her own body under the relentless rain. He looked at the little girl clinging to her mother's skirt, as small as his own daughter, shivering violently from the cold. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. It was an order born of something deep and inexplicable taking hold of his chest. Right now. Helen looked at him as if she were seeing an apparition. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. This man, she recognized him vaguely as the farmer who lived on the prosperous lands up on the hill. The lonely widower the women whispered about at the market. was offering her help? It couldn't be real. It had to be a delirium of hunger, exhaustion, and absolute despair. "I cannot accept," she finally managed to say, her voice weak. "I have no way to pay. I have nothing to offer." Raphael knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level. The rain ran off the brim of his hat, forming small waterfalls around his face. "Listen, I have 3 children at home. I lost my wife 2 years ago. Thomas is 9, Peter is 7, and Sophie," his voice faltered for a moment. "Sophie is only 2, and she is sick. Very sick. No housekeeper can replace what she needs, what they need. A mother." Helen's heart stopped. She understood what he was saying before the words were even spoken. "I need someone to care for my children," Raphael continued, every word heavy with meaning. "A real mother, not another maid who leaves when things get difficult. And you need a home for yours. Food, medicine, safety." "Are you asking me?" Helen couldn't finish the sentence, her blood running cold in her veins. "Marriage on paper only," he interrupted quickly. "You would have your own wing of the house, your entire dignity, your complete privacy. Your children would receive everything they need: doctors, food, education, protection. In exchange, you would care for my 3 as if they were your own. Nothing more, nothing beyond that." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of the rain and Michael's weak coughing. Helen looked at the son in her arms, his skin pale, his lips turning blue. She looked at Laura, so small, so fragile, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. And then she looked at this strange man, this farmer she didn't know, who was offering her not a handout, not temporary charity, but a solution, an impossible solution. Scandalous, unthinkable. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know me." Raphael looked away, staring at some distant point beyond the square. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. "Because I have seen this despair before, in the mirror, after I buried my wife. After I was left alone with 3 small children and no idea how to raise Sophie without the mother she never knew. Because my daughter is coughing exactly like your son, and I know what it feels like to lose someone you love and be unable to do anything about it." He finally looked back at her, and Helen saw something in his eyes she recognized immediately. Pain, loss, loneliness. "Because God put you in my path when we both needed a miracle." But what Helen didn't know was that Margaret Vance, the judge's wife and the unofficial queen of that small town, was watching the entire scene from the window of the parish house across the square. Helen closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision crush her already bowed shoulders. She was selling something precious, her independence, perhaps even her dignity. What would people say? A destitute widow marrying a wealthy farmer just months after losing her husband? The gossip would be cruel, merciless. But then Laura let out a low moan, too weak, and Helen knew there was no choice. There had never been a choice. "I accept," she said, her voice barely louder than a sigh. "But on one condition, I will never, ever demand anything beyond what you have offered. I don't want your money. I don't want your property. I just want my children to live. And I will care for yours as if they came from my own womb. This I promise before God." Raphael nodded slowly, something like relief crossing his weathered face. "Then it is done. Let's go. My truck is over there. We need to get these children out of the rain." The next moments passed in a surreal blur. Raphael carried Michael while Helen held Laura, running through the rain to the truck. The interior of the vehicle smelled of leather and wet earth, and for the first time in months, Helen felt something she didn't dare name. Hope? No. Hope was dangerous, but perhaps relief. A temporary relief before the reality of what she had just accepted crushed her completely. Hope Farm appeared like a vision through the curtain of rain. The large house, painted white with blue shutters, was bigger than anything Helen had ever seen in her life. Well-kept gardens surrounded the building, even under the deluge. Solid stables housed horses that probably cost more than she would earn in 10 years of sewing. And in the center of it all, that house, a mansion really, which would now be her home. No, not her home. Her golden prison, her job, her duty. Mrs. Josephine, Raphael shouted as he entered the front door, still carrying Michael. Mrs. Josephine, quickly! An elderly woman with completely white hair, tied in a loose bun, appeared, drying her hands on an apron. Her eyes widened at the scene. Raphael soaked, carrying a clearly sick child, followed by a painfully thin woman holding another child. "Good Lord in heaven," Mrs. Josephine whispered, but she didn't look shocked, just sad. Deeply sad, as if she recognized the story unfolding before her. "Bring 'em to the living room. I'll get blankets." What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Mrs. Josephine wrapped the children in thick, warm blankets, while Raphael lit the fireplace. Helen stood in the middle of the luxurious room, dripping water onto the Persian rug, completely lost. Everything was too big, too clean, too expensive. She didn't belong there. It was a mistake, a terrible mistake. "You're shivering, dear." Mrs. Josephine's voice brought her back. The housekeeper extended a soft robe. "Go change. I'll look after the little ones for now." "I can't leave them," Helen protested automatically. "Yes, you can. For 5 minutes, while you get out of those wet clothes before you get sick too." The firmness in Mrs. Josephine's voice allowed for no argument, but there was kindness there. Genuine kindness. "Go, just 5 minutes." "In the room, Mrs. Josephine." Josephine indicated, a room larger than the entire shack where she had been living. Helen peeled off her soaked clothes with hands that shook violently. It wasn't just the cold. It was everything. The weight of what she had just done, of what she had just accepted, fell upon her like an avalanche. Marriage. She had agreed to marry a man she didn't know. For convenience. For necessity. To save her children. "Forgive me, John," she whispered to her dead husband, the tears finally coming with full force. "Forgive me, but I had no choice. I had no choice." But would John truly forgive her? Or was he judging her from above, watching her trade his name, his memory, his honor for material safety? Helen covered her mouth to stifle the sobs. She couldn't break now, not in front of these people, not in front of her children. She had to be strong, just a little longer, just until Michael got better. Just until she was sure the children would be okay. Afterwards, she would think about what to do. When she returned to the living room, wearing the robe that reached her feet, she found a scene that squeezed her heart. Michael and Laura were wrapped in thick blankets before the fire, and 3 other children, Raphael's children, were watching them with curiosity and something that looked like hope. Thomas, the eldest, had eyes far too serious for his age. Peter seemed shy, half hidden behind his brother. And Sophie was a tiny girl, dark-haired with immense eyes, who coughed the exact moment Helen entered the room. The same sound, the same cursed sound Michael made. The same cough that had stolen Helen's sleep for weeks, that had made her heart bleed with fear. "She needs a doctor," Helen said immediately, the mother in her, speaking before the stranger could hesitate. "That cough, I know that cough." She needs a doctor now. Raphael looked at her with an expression Helen couldn't interpret. Gratitude? Relief? Dr. Foster is already on his way. I sent for him before we even went into town. He should be here any moment. And he arrived. Dr. August Foster was a man with white hair and steady hands, who examined Michael first, then Sophie, with meticulous attention that conveyed decades of experience. Helen watched his every move, every expression that crossed his face, trying to read a verdict before it was pronounced. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doctor sighed and looked at Raphael, then at Helen. Both children have a severe respiratory infection. The boy's is more advanced, but both need immediate treatment and constant care. Absolute bed rest, medication every 6 hours, steam to help breathing, proper food to build strength. He paused, his gentle gaze resting on Helen. And they need love, care. Someone who won't leave them, not for a second, until they are out of danger. I won't leave them, Helen said, her voice steady for the first time since she entered that house. Not for a second, that I guarantee. Dr. Foster smiled a sad but genuine smile. I believe you won't, my dear. I believe you won't. He turned to Raphael. I'll get the medicines. I'll be back in an hour. Keep the children warm until then. After the doctor left, silence fell over the room. The 5 little ones, because suddenly there were 5, not just 2, were being tended to by Mrs. Josephine, who had appeared with a tray of hot soup. Helen watched, heart tight, as the housekeeper patiently fed each one. Laura and Michael ate as if they hadn't seen food in days, and they hadn't. Sophie ate slowly, every spoonful an effort. Thomas and Peter shared their soup with the newcomers without anyone asking. They are good boys, Raphael said softly, appearing beside Helen. They missed a mother, a complete family. Helen swallowed hard. I am not their mother. Let's make that clear from the start. I am the governess, the caretaker. That is what we agreed. Then why are you crying seeing them share food? Helen brought her hand to her face, surprised to find tears wetting her cheeks. She hadn't even realized she was crying. She had no answer, or she did, but she didn't want to admit it. Because those 3 motherless boys reminded her of her own fatherless children. Because that sick little girl reminded her that Sophie was the same age Laura would be if she'd had the chance to grow strong and healthy. Because everyone there was wounded, broken, needing something she barely had for herself. Mrs. Josephine will show you to your rooms, Raphael said, walking away before Helen could respond. Rest. Tomorrow. Tomorrow we will discuss the details. The marriage. The agreement. Charade they would play for the world while each remained locked in their own suffering. Helen nodded, too weak to do anything but follow Mrs. Josephine up the stairs, carrying a sleeping Laura, while the housekeeper carried Michael. The room assigned to her was bigger than the entire house she used to live in. It had a massive bed with sheets that looked like clouds, a wardrobe of carved wood, even a small window overlooking the gardens. And next to it, connected by a door, was a smaller room with 2 beds for Michael and Laura. Here is everything you need for today, Mrs. Josephine said, pointing to piles of clean clothes, towels, extra blankets. Tomorrow we will organize the rest. For today, rest. The Lord knows you need it. Josephine left. Helen tucked the children into bed with extreme care, covering them with the softest blankets they had ever touched. Michael mumbled something in his sleep, his fever still high. Laura gripped her mother's hand even while unconscious, and Helen sat on the floor between the 2 beds, unable to go to her own room, unable to step away from them for even a second. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty room. "Lord, what have I done? Sold my soul? My honor?" But it was the only way. It was the only way to save them. You understand that, don't you? Please, tell me you understand. But in that moment, as the rain finally ceased outside and night fell over Hope Farm, Helen didn't know, couldn't know, that her desperate prayer on the park bench had been heard. That God hadn't just shown a way, he had orchestrated a meeting. That this lonely man and this shattered woman had been placed in each other's path, not by chance, but by divine purpose. That what seemed like a cold transaction was, in truth, the first step of a healing journey for 2 broken hearts and 5 children thirsty for love. And she also didn't know that on the other side of town, Margaret Vance was already on the phone with her closest friends, her voice thick with righteous indignation and poison disguised as Christian concern. A destitute seamstress, living in Raphael Montgomery's house, with sick children who could infect the whole town? This is a scandal we cannot allow. For the morality of this community, for the protection of our own families, we need to act. And fast. But what neither of them knew was that Margaret Vance already had plans far more sinister than simple gossip, and everything Raphael and Helen had built in that single day of rain was about to be tested in ways neither of them could imagine. The first week at Hope Farm passed like a fever dream. Helen barely slept, dividing herself between Michael and Laura's room and Sophie's, who coughed harder and harder during the early hours. Dr. Foster came twice a day, bringing medicines and words of encouragement, but Helen saw the growing worry in his eyes. The children were fighting, both of them, and all she could do was pray, apply the steam treatments, give the medicines at the right times, and not collapse. Raphael remained distant, almost a ghost in his own home. He worked from the first hours of the morning until nightfall, returning covered in dirt and sweat, eating dinner in silence, checking the children quickly before locking himself in his office. He barely looked at Helen, and she understood. This wasn't a real marriage. It was a business deal, a transaction. She took care of the children. He provided everything they needed, nothing more. But Thomas and Peter didn't understand this cold dynamic. To them, Helen was what Raphael had promised, a mother. They followed her around the house, helped carry blankets, and sat beside her while she tended to Sophie. Thomas, the eldest, had eyes too sad for 9 years old. But when Helen caught him trying to hide a tear upon seeing his sister coughing up blood, something inside her broke. "Come here," she said softly, opening her arms. The boy hesitated only a second before throwing himself against her chest, sobbing. "She's going to be okay." "She will be okay, I promise. God isn't going to take your little sister. Not after bringing us here." "How do you know?" Thomas's voice was muffled against her shoulder. "How can you be sure? Mommy got sick too, and—" "I know, because faith moves mountains, my son. And because sometimes God puts people in each other's paths exactly when they both need it most." Helen held the boy's face between her hands. "Your sister is strong. My Michael is strong. And we are all going to fight together. Like a family." The word escaped before she could stop it. Family. But that was what they were becoming. Helen realized with a mix of terror and amazement. It wasn't the agreement she had made. It wasn't the terms she had accepted. But it was happening anyway. In the meals where everyone sat together. In the nights where the 5 little ones slept in each other's rooms. In the way Peter called Laura my little sister, and how Michael taught Thomas to make paper boats. Mrs. Josephine watched it all, with knowing eyes and a discreet smile. "God writes straight with crooked lines, my dear," she said one afternoon, as they prepared dinner together. "You can call it an agreement, convenience, whatever you want. But I saw this house dead for 2 years. I saw that man become a shadow of himself. And I know a miracle when I see one." "I am no one's miracle," Helen replied bitterly. "I am just a desperate woman who accepted an indecent proposal to save her children." "Is that so? Then why do you spend the early hours caring for Sophie as if she were yours? Why do you cry when Thomas cries? Why do you cook Peter's favorite dishes without anyone asking?" Mrs. Josephine touched her arm gently. "Darling, the heart doesn't understand agreements. The heart only understands love." Helen was about to answer when they heard the doorbell ring at the front. It was 10 in the morning on a Sunday. The day Raphael allowed everyone to stay home so she wouldn't have to take the sick children to Mass. But when Mrs. Josephine opened the door, Helen heard female voices, many of them, and none sounded friendly. "We want to speak with the woman living here." The voice was thin, sharp, wrapped in fake sweetness. "It is our Christian duty to check on the well-being of the children." Helen entered the living room and stopped. 6 women stood in the entryway, all dressed in their Sunday best, all looking at her with a mix of morbid curiosity and thinly veiled disdain. In front, a woman with hair pulled back in a tight bun and an exaggerated pearl necklace smiled with her lips, but not her eyes. "You must be Helen Carter," the woman said, not offering her hand. "I am Margaret Vance, the judge's wife, leader of the women's auxiliary at the main church." Each title was pronounced like a weapon. "And these are my closest friends. We came to meet you personally." A lie. Helen knew a lie when she heard one. They had come to judge, to assess, to find faults. But she raised her chin and forced a smile. "Pleasure to meet you all. Can I offer you coffee?" "That won't be necessary. We won't stay long." Margaret walked into the living room uninvited, the others following like obedient ducklings. Her eyes scanned every corner, every detail, cataloging everything. "So it is true. You are living here, with your sick children, in Raphael Montgomery's house." "The children are being treated by Dr. Foster," Helen replied calmly, though her heart was racing. "And I care for Mr. Montgomery's children as part of our agreement." Agreement. Margaret practically spat the word. What kind of agreement exactly? "Because to us, decent folk, it looks much more like a situation, how shall I put it, improper." "There is nothing improper here," Helen said, her voice firmer now. "I am a widow. He is a widower. We needed each other in difficult times. God crossed our paths." "God?" one of the women laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Honey, God does not approve of women throwing themselves into strange beds months after becoming widows." Helen's blood ran cold. "How dare you?" "We dare because we care," Margaret interrupted, her voice taking on a tone of fake compassion that was more poisonous than any direct insult. "We care about the morality of this community. We care about these poor children being exposed to tuberculosis. We care about the reputation of a good man being destroyed by a woman, a desperate woman. I think you better leave my house." Raphael's voice thundered through the room. No one had heard him arrive. He stood in the doorway, his face dark with contained fury, hands clenched into fists. "Now." Margaret turned, and for the first time, her smile faltered, but she quickly composed herself. "Raphael, dear, we are only doing our duty. Your duty does not include coming into my home to insult my family." Every word was a thrown stone. Helen is my wife before God and the law. Her children are welcome here, and you are not." A stunned silence fell over the room. Wife. He had said wife, not governess, not caretaker. Wife. Helen felt the ground sway beneath her feet. Margaret recovered quickly, her eyes shining with a dangerous light. "I see. So that's how it is. Very well, Raphael. But know that this community will not tolerate this kind of scandalous behavior. There are ways to protect public morals, and we will use them if necessary." It was a threat, clear as day. And she left the house with her followers, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. "I am so sorry," Helen finally managed to say. "I should have guessed this would happen." "Hi. You have nothing to apologize for." Raphael was still looking at the door where the women had exited. "They are the ones who should be ashamed. Coming here into God knows whose house, judging. But they are right, aren't they?" Helen's voice broke. "I am exactly what they said. A desperate woman who grabbed the first opportunity, who stained your reputation, who— Stop!" Raphael finally looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a week. "You saved my daughter. Sophie is getting better every day because of you. My sons are laughing for the first time in 2 years. This house was dead, and you brought life back. I don't care what Margaret or anyone else thinks, but he should have cared." Because in the following weeks, Margaret's campaign was relentless and devastating. Shopkeepers began treating Helen coldly when she went to the market. Other mothers pulled their children away when Thomas and Peter walked by. Whispers followed Helen everywhere. Fortune hunter, shameless woman, bad influence. The worst came during Sunday Mass, 3 weeks after that fateful visit. Helen had brought only Thomas and Peter, leaving the sick children at home with Mrs. Josephine. When they entered the church, Margaret and her friends were sitting in the front pew. And when Helen sat down with the boys, the 6 women stood up noisily and moved seats, whispering loud enough for everyone to hear. "I don't want to sit near someone who is exposing us all to tuberculosis," one of them said. "Nor someone who doesn't respect proper mourning," another added. "Barely out of black and already hunting a rich husband," the third sentenced. Thomas gripped Helen's hand, his face pale. Peter started to cry softly, and Helen felt something inside her die a little. Not for the insults to her, those she could take, but for the children, for Thomas and Peter, who didn't deserve to be treated like pariahs for having gained a stepmother unwanted by society. She stood up to leave, unable to take another second, when she felt a firm hand on her shoulder. Dr. Foster was there, his face stern. "Sit down, my dear," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Sit down and stay. You have more right to be here than any hypocrite who uses the word of God to spread poison." The doctor turned to the entire congregation. "I have seen more charity in this young woman in one day than in years of empty moralism from certain ladies. I saw her awake for 3 nights straight, saving the lives of children, not just her own, but Raphael's too. I saw true kindness. And if anyone here has the courage to judge her, let them look first at their own sins." Margaret stood up, her face red with anger. "Dr. Foster, you are defending a clearly immoral situation." "I am defending the truth. And the truth is that Helen Carter Montgomery has demonstrated more true Christian faith than many who come here every Sunday just to be seen." Dr. Foster offered his arm to Helen. "Come, let's sit together. My wife and I would be honored to share a pew with you and these wonderful children." But if Helen thought that would be the end, she was terribly mistaken. Because what neither of them knew was that Margaret Vance, publicly humiliated, was already planning her most destructive attack. And 2 nights later, when silence fell over Hope Farm and everyone slept, an official notice would be delivered with the seal of the juvenile court, a formal investigation into Helen's suitability as a mother. An accusation that she had deliberately abandoned her children to misery to secure an advantageous marriage. A real, legal, definitive threat that Michael and Laura could be taken from her. And the next morning, when Raphael opened the envelope and read the words that could destroy everything, his fury would explode in a way Helen had never seen. And for the first time since arriving there, she would see cracks in the armor of the man who saved her, revealing the deep pain he kept locked inside. The paper shook in Raphael's hands. Helen saw the blood drain from his face, saw his jaw clench until the muscles popped, saw something dark and dangerous take over his eyes. He said nothing. He simply crumpled the document and marched toward the door, his heavy boots echoing through the house like thunder. "Raphael, wait!" Helen ran after him, heart racing. "What is it? What does it say?" He stopped at the door, his back rigid, but didn't turn around. "They are trying to take Michael and Laura away from you. They claim you deliberately abandoned your children to poverty to secure a wealthy marriage, that you aren't a fit mother, that the children are in danger living here." Helen's world collapsed. Her legs gave out, and she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Take her children. Take Michael, who was finally getting better. Take Laura, who for the first time in her life had enough food and laughed every day. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. I'm going to that damn judge's house." And Raphael turned, and Helen saw something that terrified her. It wasn't just anger. It was uncontrolled rage. Years of repressed pain finally exploding. "I'm going to end this now." "No!" Helen grabbed his arm. "You'll make it worse. If you confront the judge now, they'll use it against us. They'll say we are violent, unstable. Please, let God." "God?" Raphael almost screamed, ripping his arm away. "Where was God when my wife died bleeding in my lap? Where was he when Sophie cried for her mother every night for months? Where was he when your children were starving?" He was panting now, eyes red. "Don't talk to me about God, Helen. God abandoned us a long time ago." The words cut like razors. Helen felt hot tears flow. But they weren't for her. They were for this broken man before her. For that pain he kept locked away and that now overflowed like a river bursting a dam. "Don't say that. Please, don't say that." "Why? It's the truth." Raphael punched the wall, making the picture frame beside it rattle. "And now they're going to take your children because you had the audacity to accept help. Because I had the audacity to offer it. Because we both dared to try and survive." It was Mrs. Josephine who appeared, her eyes wise and sad. "Boy," she said softly, but with the authority of someone who had raised him. "You are in pain. You are angry. But you are letting that pain destroy what God is trying to build." "Nothing is being built here," Raphael shouted. "It's just more destruction. It always is. Everything I touch dies or is taken from me." Helen didn't think. She simply threw herself against him, her arms around his tense body, her head against his chest. "You aren't going to lose me. You aren't going to lose the children. You aren't going to lose this family. I won't let you." She felt him tremble, felt his breath hitch, felt years of unwept tears finally welling up. "We are going to fight, together, the right way. With faith, with dignity, but together." Raphael crumbled, literally crumbled, his knees giving way, and Helen went down with him, holding that enormous man while he finally wept. For Isabella, for Sophie without a mother, for 2 years of crushing loneliness. for the fear of losing once again. And Helen cried with him, for John, for months of misery, for sick children, for a cruel world that judged without knowing. Mrs. Josephine knelt with them, her old hands on both their heads. Lord, she prayed, her voice firm as a rock, these two children of yours are in the darkest valley. They are tired, scared, but you didn't bring them this far to abandon them now. Show the way, show the light, and give them strength for one more day. Just one more day. It was in that moment, with the three of them kneeling on the floor of the entryway, that Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs. The little girl came down slowly, still weak, but without coughing, without that terrible sound that had tormented everyone for weeks. She stopped in front of Helen, her huge eyes fixed on her, and reached out her little arms. "Mommy," she said for the first time in her life, the word she had never spoken to anyone. Foster. Helen read it aloud, her voice failing on the last word. 2 miracles. In the same morning, Sophie healed. Michael healed. At the exact moment, everything was falling apart. Coincidence? There is no coincidence, Mrs. Josephine said, reading her thoughts. There is God saying it isn't over yet, that there is a purpose, that you need to trust just a little longer. The following days were the hardest. The investigation advanced. A social worker came to inspect the house, asking invasive questions, looking at Helen with barely disguised suspicion. Margaret ensured the whole town knew about the lawsuit, spreading that finally the truth would come out about that woman. The children felt the tension, becoming quieter, more scared. Helen barely slept, spending the nights praying, begging for a sign, for a way out. It was Thomas who heard it by chance. He had gone to get water in the kitchen during one of Margaret's meetings with her friends at the parish house next to the church, and the windows were open. He ran back home, eyes wide. "Dad, Dad, I heard it. I heard Mrs. Vance talking." The words came out stumbling. She said she paid Helen's husband to go away, that she invented the complaint, that she has fake papers. Raphael froze. Helen froze. And then they looked at each other, and for the first time in weeks, Helen saw real hope in his eyes. "Are you sure?" Raphael asked, kneeling to his son's height. "Absolutely sure?" "I am." She was laughing, saying she was going to get Helen out of here no matter what. That Miss Clarissa had lied about things she saw here, but no one would know because... Because what, son? Because her father is the judge. Everything suddenly made sense. The speed of the process, the ease of the complaint. Margaret wasn't just using influence. She was using direct power. Her husband was the judge. And if Clarissa had lied, Dr. Foster, when they told him, was livid. This is a crime. Forgery, bribery, abuse of power. He looked at Raphael. "But we need proof." "The proof exists," a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. Clarissa Vance was standing there, her face pale, hands trembling as she held a folder of documents. "I have the proof. All of it." The silence was absolute. Margaret's daughter, the one for whom this whole persecution had started, was turning in her own mother. "Why?" Helen finally asked. "Why are you doing this?" Clarissa stepped in, tears flowing freely. "Because I'm tired. Tired of being used as an excuse for her bitterness. She told me for years that Raphael was going to marry me, that it was my destiny, that I deserved that farm. But she never asked what I wanted. She looked at Raphael. I don't love you. I never did. But she used me anyway, used my name to justify this horrible persecution." Clarissa held out the folder. "Everything is here. The receipts for the money she paid to John Carter, the fake letters she forged, even a recording of a conversation where she admits to fabricating the complaint. Helen felt her legs weaken again. John had been paid to abandon her. The man she had loved, who had sworn to protect her, had sold his family for Margaret's money. The betrayal burned, but strangely, it also liberated. It hadn't been her fault. It never was. "What do you want in return?" Raphael asked, ever suspicious. "Nothing. I want peace. I want my mother to stop, and I want to ask for forgiveness." Clarissa looked at Helen. "Forgiveness for all the lies, for all the suffering. You didn't deserve any of this." The decision was made quickly. Dr. Foster took the documents directly to the public prosecutor, bypassing Judge Vance completely. And 2 days later, during the church charity ball, that event where all of society would be present, the truth exploded. The prosecutor interrupted the party, accompanied by 2 police officers. "Margaret Vance, you are being formally charged with forgery, bribery, and influence peddling. Judge Vance, you are being removed from the case and investigated for complicity." The silence was deafening. Then the murmuring began, growing until it became a roar of shock and indignation. Margaret tried to flee, but was stopped. And it was Dr. Foster, respected for 50 years of dedicated medicine, who stood up and spoke. "This community should be ashamed. We all should be. We judged without knowing, condemned without proof, believed lies because they came wrapped in fake morality." He looked around the hall. Helen Carter Montgomery demonstrated more true faith and charity in 2 months than many of us have in decades, and we crucified her for it. One by one, people began to stand up, asking for forgiveness, ashamed. The priest, who had remained too neutral for too long, climbed the makeshift pulpit. This community forgot what is truly Christian: to forgive, to welcome, not to judge. And I failed as a pastor by not defending those in need. He looked directly at Helen and Raphael. "I ask for forgiveness, humbly." Margaret was taken away, screaming about injustice, about conspiracy. But no one listened to her anymore. Her kingdom had fallen. And Helen, standing beside Raphael with the 5 children around them, felt something she hadn't felt in so long she almost didn't recognize it. Peace. 3 months later, Raphael asked Helen to marry him again. Not an agreement, not a convenience, but true love, built brick by brick in the late nights caring for sick children, in shared meals, in fears faced together, in the faith that refused to die. "Marry me for real," he said, kneeling in the same garden where Sophie was playing, healthy for the first time. "Not out of necessity, not out of convenience, but because I love you, because you taught me that God hadn't abandoned me. He was just preparing me for you." Helen said yes through tears, and they married in a simple but emotional ceremony, in the same church where they had been humiliated, with the whole town present, witnessing not a scandal, but a redemption. 5 years later, Hope Farm was unrecognizable, the laughter of 5 children. Michael, now 11, and studying medicine like Dr. Foster. Thomas, 14, helping his father on the farm. Peter, 12, teaching Sunday school. Laura and Sophie, 8 and 7, playing inseparably in the garden, echoed everywhere. And in Helen's arms, little Gabriel, 2 years old, hair black like his father's, eyes brown like his mother's, slept peacefully. Helen had transformed part of the farm into a sewing workshop where she taught the trade to widows and needy women for free. More than 20 families had already been helped. Raphael, who had locked his heart away, now laughed loudly and organized parties for orphan children every Christmas. And Margaret, after serving a reduced sentence for good behavior, appeared one day at the farm door. Old, broken, alone. Her husband had left her. Her daughter had moved away. Her friends had abandoned her. "I came to ask for forgiveness," she said, her voice small. "I don't deserve it. I know I don't deserve it. But..." Helen looked at that woman who had almost destroyed everything. She looked at Raphael beside her, at the children playing, at the life they had built from the ashes, and she extended her hand. "To forgive is divine," she said simply. "And God taught me that we all deserve second chances." In that golden sunset, watching her children play, and Gabriel waking up, asking to be held, Helen finally understood. God had never abandoned her on that park bench in the rain. He was just guiding her to where she was always meant to be. Every tear, every desperation, every moment of pain, it had all been part of a greater plan she couldn't see while she was inside the storm. Raphael hugged her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder, as they watched the sunset dye everything gold. "You didn't just come to save my children," he whispered. "You saved me. You brought me back to life. And you gave me hope when I had none left," Helen replied, turning to kiss him. "You gave me a family when I thought I had lost everything." Mrs. Josephine, now retired but living in a comfortable house built by Raphael on the farm, watched from the porch and smiled. "God moves in mysterious ways," she murmured. "He always does." And it was true. Because when God orchestrates a meeting, there is no chance, only purpose awaiting the right time to reveal itself. When He plants kindness in wounded hearts, there is no despair He cannot transform into a blessing. When He unites two broken souls, there is no storm strong enough to separate what He has decided to join. Faith, Helen learned, is never doubting. It is continuing to believe even when everything seems lost. It is kneeling in the rain and asking for a miracle. It is accepting help when pride screams to refuse. It is forgiving when hurt demands revenge. It is choosing love when fear whispers to run. And in the end, always in the end, God answers. Perhaps not in the way we expect. Perhaps not in the time we want. But always, always He answers, because He who plants kindness reaps blessings. He who chooses faith finds miracles. And he who opens his heart, even when it is broken, discovers that true love doesn't just heal, it transforms.